Alright, hey guys, welcome back to another Hot Takes episode, and this one's gonna be a bit special because I am going to be including my face cam. So for those of you who don't know, I have a couple episodes on this channel where I essentially just talk ad-lib and kind of read through comments that you guys post on certain takes or certain opinions you have about the game, whether it be the game itself or the social atmosphere of the game, anything like that. And there's usually like just live gameplay commentary, or not like live gameplay, but just the game I recorded of me playing in the background if you want to watch. And so that'll be playing just to give you something to look at. I'll post Subway Surfers if you guys get bored, but for the time being we're going to do this. And I think adding my face cam would make things a bit more stimulating. So you guys know the drill. I'm going to be picking a couple comments from the community post that I put about a couple weeks ago. And just giving my thoughts on, you know, just what you guys, what your comment is or how I feel about it. And yeah, that'll be it. So we'll get a couple. We'll see how long the video goes. I'll aim for about maybe 20 minutes and then that'll be it for today. Okay, so the first comment, and the one that I actually think is going to be the sort of center point of the video, is from Burntastic7547, and they say, towers should be actually scary again. They're an absolute joke past laning phase and even before, depending on your lane. I wholeheartedly agree. I think the current issue right now is that towers have remained more or less the same, and if not, they've gotten even weaker, but character damage has gotten a lot higher, or champion damage, because if you notice, like if you take like a runes or things like that, there are some champions who are starting out with like 90 base AD, whereas back in the day it would only be about like maybe 65 to 70. Not just that, but it's become easier to obtain sources of damage to towers that make it very easy to take them down, even with tower plates or tower reinforcements. So the way it works is that if a tower plate is taken, the subsequent plates get much harder to take down within a short period of time, so that a person can't just like 100 to 0 a tower. But then they end up being able to anyway, because Void Grubs do true damage, and then there's Demolish, and a number of other ways for people to just do a lot of damage to towers. Like for example, Jax can use W on towers, Rek'Sai can use Q on towers. Before you couldn't do that, now you can. And of course, as time goes on, the towers do not mature in, I guess, durability. So as champions get stronger and people can take down towers like, you know, just like that, it just makes them feel so insignificant towards the mid to late game, because one, you could take them down very quickly, right? So by like 25 minutes, if you can ace the entire team, or even if you do like, let's say a 5 for 2 and there's 3 people still alive, then you can pull towers. You can go from like tier 1 mid lane all the way to inhib within 40 seconds, which is super consequential because, you know, especially in the mid game, that's part of the whole reason why people are kind of on edge whenever it's in the mid game, because things can happen so dramatically in such a short period of time. On top of that, I think one more aspect of towers that kind of has been, it's hard to really say, because on one hand they've been balancing it a little bit, or they've been giving it some attention. They've been kind of going back and forth on like what they want to do with it, but towers in particular are not really that much of a threat. Basically, we have towers being way too easy to take down, and also towers not being that threatening. This is not a new concept per se, because if you remember back in the tank meta spanning seasons 5 through 7, there was one clip of Hanser who famously tanked like 27 tower shots in a row on Nautilus with like only 3 items. It's not exactly something that's been happening just recently, but people have been pointing out that, for example, tower diving has become too easy because of how inconsequential they are, or how just in general, if you have anyone who's remotely bulky, you could do tower dives very quickly, which kind of defeats the purpose of towers being a safe space or a place where you can hunker down and feel reasonably safe. Should towers be impossible to dive? Of course not, right? Like, you do want to give the team who's in a position of advantage an opportunity to force their advantage onto the enemy team. They can't just like sit there and put a stalemate for the entirety of the game. I'm on the side of towers should be more threatening. I think one of the changes that kind of did away with the whole towers not being threatening enough was when, between seasons 5 or 4, when they made the new Summoner's Rift, like when they reworked it for the first time in season 5 or like early season or late season 4, they made it so inhibitor towers and nexus towers, instead of just firing a regular shot, like, you know, how most towers do, they had like a laser, like a and then like the longer you were getting hit by that laser, the bigger it got and the more damage it would do. So it was basically like a very strong damage over time that like went, so it's like at a certain point, if you stayed under it for too long, it would shred you really quickly. It was like even more effective than just regular towers. But then I forget exactly what version they brought it back from, but they reverted it back to the normal tower shot. It was just 1, 2, 3, 4, And I think there is still the same damage progression, like, if you stay under tower, you take more damage from subsequent shots. But the laser progressed faster because it was not just like, oh, you could tower dance, like, draw aggro and things like that. I think the laser tower was better, but at the same time, just recently in Season 15, they made it so Nexus towers can respawn, making it so if you could barely stave off the enemy team from destroying a Nexus and then just wait a couple minutes, then you can get your Nexus towers back. But that doesn't change the fact that the Nexus towers get destroyed really quickly anyway, and just any tower in particular. Tower plates were put in place to make it so towers are not that easy to take on, and therefore tower dives can be more threatening when you can't just like take it out quickly. But I think right now we're definitely in a position where towers are certainly more on the weaker side, like I feel like you don't really hear people complaining about, oh my goodness, like towers are super hard to take down or they do so much damage. Nowadays you hear people saying like, oh, I get dove under tower at level 2, which shouldn't really happen unless you're getting like 4 men dove and there's only 1 person left and you're out of sums, right? Like I think towers, broadly speaking, should definitely be scarier because in the laning phase, people see towers as an opportunity to just get more gold. That's what they see towers as. They don't see them as an obstacle, they see them as an opportunity to profit, which is not the right way to go about it. Towers are supposed to be a method of defense for you to like sit back and kind of do what you can to farm or turtle up while you work towards your levels and your items in the mid to late game. Again, it's a hard balance because you want to give the team an advantage, an opportunity, or a chance to push their lead. And if the person is just sitting under tower, just hunkering down, farming, doing all that, then it feels like you're not able to advance the game state in your favor, which thus results in a stalemate, and no one really likes that. It just unnecessarily elongates the game time, and while I have spoken out about games being way too short as of late and people just giving up instantly because they see no reason to continue due to the snowballing nature of the game, I also concede that if people play well in laning phase, then the other person who didn't play well, their lane opponent, should be punished for not doing well, and it's hard to punish them if their towers are too strong. So it's a hard balance to find. I definitely think towers could be buffed a little bit, just a bit, to make it so they don't just explode immediately and they actually pose a threat in the mid to late game. Dives should be more of a concerted effort that requires coordination and, proper resource management, and also lack of resources from the defending team to be executed. I don't think it's just something that you can do at level 1 or level 2 and just one tap them and then get the hell out without taking damage. There are a couple ways to go about that. Either A, just do the usual reinforcing the tower, give them more armor, magic resist, damage reduction, more health, things of that nature. Or if they're going to increase the aggressive component of towers, give it faster attack speed. So instead of like pew, 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 they could do perhaps, along with the increasing damage, they could do like a ramping attack speed thing where it's like pew, 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 pew. So it's like it gets faster and faster, because tower dancing is interesting in that, to my knowledge, even if you switch aggro from one champion to another, the damage increase stays the same. But because of tower aggro requiring a bit of time to like lock onto a champion, it's like a way you can kind of stall for it. Because like you've seen that happen before, right? A couple times whenever you play a game, you walk under tower, you hear the alert sound like that ding, but you can still walk out without taking a tower shot. Like you see the exclamation point or whatever on the tower that says, hey, I see you and I'm gonna attack you, but within that same tick you can back away and dodge it. And you see a couple of players mess around with that in tower dives to sort of wait right before the next shot comes out to maintain that aggro and then step away. Along with the increasing damage, which is a good change that they added to where like you can't reset the damage by changing aggro, they can make it so the tower just attacks faster to where tower dives need to happen very quickly, because if they don't, then, it's going to be consequential for the team that tries to dive. Anyways, that's kind of wrapping up my thoughts on that comment. The towers should actually be scary again, I agree. I think they could be a bit stronger, but again, it's a hard balance between making the towers threatening enough and defensive enough to not just be a tiny little obstacle like a walking cannon minion or a stationary cannon minion, but at the same time you want to give players a feeling that they can advance the game state when they acquire a lead. And if you overstep that balance, then the games can get really slow and it could be very boring or very frustrating when you get like a 4 for 0 but you can barely do anything with it. Next comment is from Vage Mika. Stat checkers and point and click abilities are a necessary evil, with how wild power creep has gotten? That's an interesting one. I actually have not thought about it like that. I'm kind of when it comes to stat checkers, I think they're definitely not great. There's more benefit to them not being in the game than to them being in the game. But that's probably why FH Mika specified that it's a necessary evil with how wild power creep has gotten, in the sense that because of all these overloaded champions and overtuned champions who can do a billion different things, having champions that can just like bonk and like stop them in place could be something that is required to not cause these champions to spiral out of control. Because I mentioned how in my Ambessa video that just for all the movement and the harass and shielding and dashing and battle healing and armor penetration she has, she loses really hard to any champion that could just walk up to her and beat her down like non-stop. Like if I remember correctly, let me actually just pull it up. You can't see it, I have my browser on right now. Let me actually just pull up Ambessa for a moment and then look at her losing matchups. Like Trundle, right? Trundle, Warwick, Tryndamere, Darius, they literally just run her down. Like no strategy required, just run at her, ba 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 ba. And then that's how they win, that's how she loses. Having these champions to kind of just be there and be like, no, you stop, and then just whoop them is something that, yeah, I would say it could be a necessary evil. At the same time, it's not really something that is encouraged. It's not an option that I think Riot needs to really see as their primary objective. It's something that you can consider and you can incorporate into your game plan along with a bunch of other decisions that you want to make, but on its own, stat checkers are a lazy way to go about solving overloaded champions. I think proper champion design, it takes precedence over making a response to it. It's the same thing as like the stat checkers that are put in place to supposedly counter these overloaded champions are a medicine to the problem, as opposed to just doing away with the problem. Now, for the record, I'm not saying you can't make elaborate champions who can do a bunch of different things and have a lot of outplay potential and skill expression. I encourage it. But the best way to kind of think about it is that, does the champion in question strip away agency from the other competition in a way that doesn't allow them to do the same to them, right? Like it's a push and pull. A champion like Jhin is a very well designed champion, has a lot of skill expression, and can do a lot for the team. But no one has any issues with him because he's fair. There's ample amounts of counterplay for him, and there's ample amounts of counterplay that he can do against them as well. Like he can change up his playstyle, play a more artillery focused option, and yeah, so there's like ways you can go about it. You want an equal push and pull between champions, but certain overloaded champions just don't let you do that. And stat checkers are kind of that answer to the loss of agency. Stat checkers are kind of the, if I can't have it, you can't have it either consequence or response to overloaded champions. Because you have an overloaded champion like, let's say, Yasuo or Yone, right? Well, let's use Yone. Yone with all his million dashes, he can dash in, he can shield, he can do all this, he can just blink back, there's no consequence to his engage. So if you have someone who just ignores all of that and, bonks him to death, which funnily enough, a lot of champions can do that to Yone, they just walk up to him and just beat him down with the faster stat line, or the bigger stat line. That also is like the two wrongs don't make a right thing, right? Where the stat checker takes away agency from the Yone, because what can Yone do against a stat checker? That's the whole point of a stat checker. If they have more stats than you do, then there's nothing you can do. So I don't really advise fighting fire with fire. Sometimes it's necessary. Again, they specified it's a necessary evil. However, I do think they should try to look for other options first. This next comment is going to be from Chabadi, with I think a Psyduck icon. Very nice. I think Summoner's Rift is getting too cramped with things. The new objective icon is a prime example of this, where it feels like it was shoehorned into the map. I really think that it's time to add multiple maps into the game and divide the millions of things in Summoner's Rift to these maps to make each of them more digestible. Very good comment, and I actually want to elaborate more on this. So back in 2021, I actually made a video on why Summoner's Rift is the only map, or the only competitive map for League of Legends. If you look at other competitive games, they have a stage list or multiple stages they can access. Whether I think Overwatch had a number of stages. I don't really play Overwatch, or I don't play Overwatch at all. But I think Overwatch had multiple stages. Then you also had Fortnite, they had multiple maps. You have fighting games like Smash where you have a stage list that you can inference. Those are there because the focus is less on the map and more about the characters that are being played. Yes, you can, argue certain characters have an advantage in this map, or certain characters have an advantage in that map, or in the case of like Fortnite, there might be some camping spots that are a little bit cheap. But considering in Fortnite you can build your own structures, it's irrelevant, it's a moot point. The reason Summoner's Rift is the only map that you can play competitively in League, or like the only map that people say maintains the competitive integrity of the game, is because so much is dependent on the map, not so much the characters. It's the map first and the characters second. That comes at the territory of a MOBA game. That's not to say you can't design multiple maps, but think about how much is put into Summoner's Rift, how much time, how much research, analysis, practice, team coordination, just all of the number of macro decisions and things you have to look into, and the constant studying and updating you have to do, with even the slightest detail. Because again, while you're figuring something out, the opposing team is also figuring something out, and you're just kind of stacking on top of each other. Simply adding one extra map doubles that. It doubles an infinitely stacking thing. Summoner's Rift, despite being around for like 15 years, give or take, is not even close to being solved. You still have people optimizing the jungle clears, optimizing rotations, people still thinking about ways in which they can rotate the things faster, manipulate the waves so that they can, achieve a better priority state for when they rotate to objectives and things like that. I agree in that Summoner's Rift has become too cramped. There's just too many things to look into. I mentioned that in the problem with Season 2025 video, is that it's so overbloated. There's just too many things you have to worry about. But adding an entire new map, while I think it would be fun, it would be really refreshing. In fact, I think that might be one of the few things that Riot could possibly look into to kind of expand more on the game or make it feel new again, is to add a brand new map that is a 5v5 game mode. But therein lies a different problem. Obviously in a 5v5 game mode you need 3 lanes and then you need a jungle. How many more ways can you design that without it looking like another Summoner's Rift? Like, you can look at maybe Dota or other MOBAs and think, okay, we could do this, you can do that, but you still have to maintain the shape, the structure, the distance from point A to point B. Like, you can't just say make the map bigger, because that is going to affect a lot of different things. The tempo, you have to adjust the champion movement speed and recall timers and things like that. You can't, so I get what you're trying to say, and I wholeheartedly agree that, like, yeah, it would be cool, it'd be a lot of fun if we had a new Summoner's Rift or like 2 different types of maps or even 3. But logistically, how is that possible to implement in a way that does not cause more disruption to the community's experience than benefit? So if we add another Summoner's Rift, then that would be even more work to figure out, making the game even more difficult, more exhausting to keep up with, and more beginner unfriendly. Problem 2. How many ways can we design a 5v5 game mode with 3 lanes and a jungle that doesn't make it look like Summoner's Rift, because you still have to follow the same size, constraints, and structure? So it would just be Summoner's Rift but with like a reworked jungle, in which case why not just go back to the original Summoner's Rift and just change the jungle? But they can't do that because, like, I mean, they've attempted it. They tried alcoves, they tried, no, they actually did, what am I saying? In Season 14, they made new pathways throughout the jungle and whatnot. My point being is that it's just Summoner's Rift again. In like a third-person shooter or first-person shooter, you can design multiple buildings, multiple elevations and whatnot, but League, it's just a flat plane. You can't do like floor 1, floor 2, things like that, because it's a bird's eye view looking down. So yeah, it's just hard to implement. I think you'd have to rework a lot of League as a whole, and that just would not make it League anymore. Okay, we'll do one more. I know I should cover more comments, but I do kind of get really rambling into that. This one's going to be from Steven Hernandez. Riot needs to stop trying to force characters to other roles, especially if their mage is released, such as Seraphine being forced into the support category and Hui APC, etc. More broadly speaking, the notion of a champion being a flex pick, as in you can play them top jungle, mid support, ADC jungle, whatever, right? That too can be an interesting kind of can of worms to look into. I made a couple videos talking about one in particular where I mentioned how, you guys remember when Talon, Zed, Qiyana got buffs that made them usable in the jungle? Qiyana not so much anymore, but the jungle's like the biggest offender of this, where they're just trying to push every possible champion to be a jungler, mostly for the sake of making it more accessible, because jungle is the role least played by players and it's the most auto-filled role. So the intention is, oh, if I get auto-filled, but let's say I'm a Talon one-trick, I could just play Talon jungle, or if I get auto-filled and I'm a Wukong top main, I could play Wukong jungle. If I'm a Zed main, I play Zed jungle. Things of that nature. This is a very subjective topic On one hand, you have some people saying like it's cool that we can have a bunch of different champions in different roles. On the other, it does make the meta very confusing because you have to now think about however many champions are put into every single role, right? Like top, you can play any champion in top. Jungle, you can play practically every class in the jungle. Mid, you can play practically every class in mid. There's more accessibility and more... what's the word? I can't words. What's the word? There's a word for it, but it becomes a melting pot of sorts. The only role that kind of maintains a okay, only these champions can go in there is bot lane. And even then, they've incorporated mages bot lane like Karthus, Hui, Swain, Mel to an extent, Seraphine, and whatnot. It gives players more options, right? Again, if you get autofilled, if you're mid and you're autofilled ADC, then you can play a mage or even support, right? Like they're making it so there's support Elise, there was support Camille for a moment, there was support Pantheon, support Silas, support, they just had a bunch of different supports. I get where they're coming from, right? They want to make it so you can play your champion in a role that, while it's not the most optimal, is definitely better than you just first timing a champion. Although the funny thing is people first time anyway. It does congest the roster a bit. Oh yeah, I talked about like carry supports, for example. Carry supports are frowned upon by the community. They generally just don't like people who play carry supports, mostly because of the fact that it's hard to know what that carry support is capable of compared to, let's say, a support Leona or support Lulu, where you're like, okay, if I get engaged on, I have a bit more defense, or if Blitzcrank lands a hook, then just go in, get some damage in, and stuff like that. Part of me also thinks that it's not necessarily a product of Riot, it's also a product of the player, because you have players on the regular forcing a champion into a role that may not be appropriate for them. In fact, In fact, my good friend Happy Chime Notes has made an entire brand on people who took champions in different roles that just look like they make no sense and are completely grief. Actually, someone replied to the comment. His name is Manuel Bonelli. It's not Riot who forced Seraphine to support. It was the community who used her more there. In fact, it's mostly the community who decides how to use the character. Vi was supposed to be a top laner, and now she's a jungler because people used her there. Tom is used both support and top, while Riot would only like to have him in one role. At the end of the day, it's the players who play and see where the kit works better. Riot can make an impact, but usually it happens when something is too oppressive, like Pyke mid. Precisely. Whether Riot wants to make a champion go here or there, players are gonna find a way to go against that, right? They're gonna be like, okay, I'm gonna put this champion in jungle, I'm gonna put this champion in support. So the safe option is for Riot to endorse it, so to speak. It's kind of like the prohibition thing, where if you quote-unquote legalize it, that allows for more regulation and therefore less players who are gonna be griefing by picking Cinch jungle and just losing the game. If Riot's like, okay, so we know they're gonna play Pyke mid, well, okay, Pyke mid's an exception, they had to nerf him to the ground. But if like, okay, we know that AD Assassin mains, they're terrible junglers because they just don't know how to play a different champion, so they're so used to kind of just going for kills and they're inting and things like that. Okay, you know what, we'll throw them a bone. We'll make it so if they're Talon one trick and then they first time Graves and then they run it down, you know what, let's just make it so if they get autofill jungle, they can play Talon and be reasonably successful with it. That would be how I'm deducing Riot going about trying to make every single champion played in multiple roles, is that there's a high likelihood that it's to preserve the experience of the game. That would be my, I guess, thought or my theory on why Riot is trying to make every single champion go in more than one role. It's for the sake of preserving the game's experience and not ruining it by people first timing a champion while autofilled, and instead picking a champion they do know how to play just in an unfamiliar situation. So while they may not know the fundamentals of jungle or support or mid, at least they know their champion. Counterintuitive as it may sound, because I know lately it seems like Riot's been trying to ruin the experience of the game, it does kind of make a champion more at risk of spiraling out of control because, for example, you have champions like Smolder who went top, mid, and ADC and was doing really well in all of them, so they had to nerf the entire champion to the ground for that purpose. Or you had Pyke mid, another one. There was also Zeri top, mid, and ADC. So sometimes a champion gets too out of control and they kind of dominate way too much, have way too high of a presence in the metagame, and therefore they do need to be shut down, which ends up making them have to overcompensate and overshut them down. But it's a balance. Like with anything, it's a balance. I do think that there is merit to having champions double in multiple roles, especially if you play that champion, right? Like Seraphine. A Seraphine main can queue up mid and support, and they'll have a champion for both roles. Seraphine, it's a lot better than a one-trick in mid lane, and then if they get autofilled support, they just pick some random champion and then they intend feed on it. So that would be my thought on that. I don't think it's necessarily Riot trying to force characters to other roles, it's more that we're forcing characters to other roles, and Riot is trying to just make it so that it doesn't cause too much damage. It's more damage control, you know? Okay, so we're running it a bit late. I think we're about half an hour in. I think we're gonna wrap it up here. It's a lot of fun making these discussions because I can talk more ad lib. I understand the production quality is not as impressive because it's live commentary and there's no like fancy edits or anything, it's just gameplay in the background. But nevertheless, I hope you enjoy. Every once in a while, it's refreshing to just speak my mind and not have to like write a script for it. It's also just easier to make. Some days I'm feeling pretty burned out and I kind of just want to get a video done. I do consider this a low effort video, same as like a tier list video, but I also do think there's a place for them. But if you guys enjoyed, be sure to let me know in the comments down below if you have any hot takes of your own. And I'll probably do a community post next time to be like, hey, I'm going to do another episode. I'll do it, you know, once or twice a year. And we'll see how it goes. But for the time being, if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, and join my Discord server. And check out my other hot takes episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.